So, with that, are we ready to rock, roll, and learn? Yes. And we open today's conference, following this beautiful conversation with our founders and trustees, with a theme on Frontlines of Resilience, Florida-based climate solutions. Moderating this panel is Elizabeth Fata Carpenter, Executive Director at Everglades Law Center. Please proceed to the stage. The speakers, Dr. Meenakshi, Chabba, Ecosystem and Resilience Scientist from Everglades Foundation, and John Paul, better known as JP Brooker, Director of Florida Conservation and Ocean Conservancy. From coast to marsh and everything in between, this panel is going to talk to us about frontline climate solutions and policies that are shaping a more resilient future. And JP, the Ocean Conservancy, and Dr. Chabba of the Everglades Foundation are going to share insights. And making it come alive, Elizabeth? Let's rock. Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I will stand over it.
A little height doesn't hurt anybody. Speaking of
I've got it built in. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, to our first panel of today's Climate Corrections Conference. As mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Fata Carpenter. I'm the Executive Director of the Everglades Law Center, and I'm so thrilled today to be speaking with JP and Meenakshi. We've already done wonderful introductions, so I'll save our time on that. But I just want to anchor these two panelists in our discussion today. We can't talk about climate solution issues in Florida without talking about water and the flow of water across our landscape. And the Meenakshi and JP's intersection of their work does, I think, a fantastic job highlighting not only the problems that we're facing in Florida, but the solutions from the inland issues all the way to our coast. So I'm going to let JP go ahead and start out with a discussion of both of those things today.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone for being here. Really glad to kick the conference off with you guys and talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is Florida's ocean and coasts and what we can do as a community to work to protect it against some of the biggest threats our state and our nation are facing. I work for Ocean Conservancy. I'm the director of our Florida Conservation Program. I'm a sixth-generation Floridian, born and raised just east of here in Brevard County, Florida. I grew up on the Indian River Lagoon. Shout out to Brevard. And as I said, I work for Ocean Conservancy, which is the nation's oldest marine conservation nonprofit organization. And we've been working since 1972 at the nexus of science and policy to effectuate meaningful change for our ocean planet. But we've been in Florida for 4 decades as a part of our overall mission. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we've decided that Florida is a paramount place to work on these issues. Now, why is that? I mean, no other state but Florida has 800 miles of beaches. What other state is so intrinsically tied to the ocean, this beautiful ocean that is, identified by this 300-mile-long Florida coral reef tract that spans from Martin County all the way down to the Dry Tortugas on Florida's east coast? Florida is rich with natural beauty and iconic ocean wilderness, and we, as Ocean Conservancy, acknowledge that it's a place that's worth protecting. But we also acknowledge that it's a place that is facing some of the greatest challenges, some, that are threatening our inherent way of life on the coasts. And climate change, I think, and the subject that we're here to talk about, resilience in the face of climate change, is really the paramount challenge facing Florida's ocean and coasts. And climate change manifests in some interesting ways in Florida. It's not just the issues that we see with flooding and sea level rise. It can have some other impacts, like, for example, events that harm wildlife. What kind of fish is this? Can anyone tell me what kind of fish this is? Yes, back there? It's a Goliath grouper. A Goliath grouper can end up being 800 pounds. They can be 8 feet long. They're massive fish, and they're really iconic of the Floridian ocean and coasts. And this Goliath grouper died in Sanibel. Anyone can guess what killed it? Red tide killed this fish, and red tide, we found, is supercharged by a changing climate, by a climate that includes warming water temperatures that fuels harmful algal events, but a climate that also can increase salinity, that can exacerbate nutrient inputs with flooding events and with drought events. And all of that climate change can actually make harmful algal events like red tide worse, and we are seeing them becoming more frequent and more severe. Other impacts to wildlife, it's not just fish. Marine reptiles and mammals can be killed by red tide events and other harmful algal blooms. This is a green turtle off the coast of St. Pete during the red tide event a few years back. We're also seeing manatees dying in record numbers in recent years. Just a few years ago, we lost a quarter of the manatee population. 25% of Florida's manatees died in an unusual mortality event. And manatees are really the canary in the coal mine for a changing climate. They are extremely susceptible to the warming waters that affect everything from the seagrass that they need to eat to the quality of the water that they need to thrive in. We're also seeing, as I mentioned, flooding events. This is 2 blocks from my house in St. Petersburg. I live in downtown St. Petersburg, and we're seeing sunny day flooding events. I think that most people are only associating with South Florida, but we're seeing it statewide. And I bring this up because the problems we're seeing really are statewide. It's from South Florida, where we see king tide events bringing octopuses into parking garages, to my neck of the woods in St. Pete, to the Keys, where we're seeing more frequent and severe tropical weather fueled by a changing climate, all the way to the Panhandle, where we're seeing storms like Hurricane Michael bring devastation to agricultural plantations all the way 45 miles inland from the coast. And that changing weather, that changing climate, all of these problems that are driven by these challenges that we're facing have brought all of us on deck to work together. And that's the message that we as Ocean Conservancy want to give to you, is that we're all here together to make a change. We're all here, all hands on deck, to effectuate meaningful change for Florida's ocean and coasts. And so to that end, we are working hand over fist in Washington, D.C., in Tallahassee, and in the hearts and minds of Floridians to make the ocean and coasts in Florida tantamount to corn in Iowa. It's a political no-brainer. You just can't operate in Florida without caring first and foremostly about the ocean and coasts and about being resilient in a changing climate. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Meenakshi. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to give this conversation with you guys. Thank you. I think you just have to click through that last one.
Thank you so much, JP. And, good morning, everyone. No one in this room is surprised to hear that climate change reveals itself most consequentially as a water crisis, right? It is an intersection we're all familiar with, and one of the ways it is amplifying the most defining challenge to people, ecosystems, and economies is the access to safe, reliable drinking water. All over the world, more than half of the population experiences water scarcity during part of the year. And also, more than 2 billion people do not have access to clean drinking water. But you would be surprised if I said that Florida itself is not insulated from this global water crisis. And currently, as we speak, 70% of Florida is under extreme drought conditions, and the rest of it is in moderate to severe.
It's nice when you don't have to say fresh side.
Water restrictions have been issued for several counties, and this is not new. The National Geographic in 1972 ran a headline and an issue on South Florida's water crisis.
So he will have the clicker,
right.
and then when you're going to speak, he'll give the clicker to you.
Let's do a dive into our history to find out why. For thousands of years.
I know she has it, but I'm going to ask her.
Can I go back?
It does.
Sorry about that. For thousands of years,
Get it out. I'll walk on first and take the farthest chair.
for thousands
and
of
then
years,
you two.
the Everglades
think we could-
dominated most
Usually
of
the
South
stairs.
Florida with its
Maybe they're here.
water,
They're probably
abundant fresh water that moved all across the state.
I don't know if I'll go all the way to the
the
end
Lake
or
Okeechobee,
just the middle,
actually,
I don't know.
the certain bit north and just south of Orlando, from the headwaters of River Kissimmee, all the way down to the southern coastal regions. They were nourishing habitats, wildlife, bays, and estuaries. But as modern settlement came in, what did we do? We degraded the Everglades to half its size, reducing freshwater flows. What it triggered off is multiple water crises, from algal blooms to carbon emissions, saltwater intrusion, drought, and fish and seagrass die-offs. And of course, this was very crucial, not just as the freshwater resources of the Everglades were a resource for the economy, but also because the Everglades is the source of water for 9 million South Floridians. That is, 1 in every 3 Floridians depend on the Everglades for their drinking water. But in the year 2000, we turned a page in history and signed bipartisan support for a comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. This was important because it promised to fix all the crises that I just mentioned. What it really is water infrastructure, a series of water infrastructure projects that are doing 3 things mainly. 1, they are increasing the storage of water in the Everglades. They're cleaning that water through natural means. And lastly, sending the water south where it belongs. These are water infrastructure projects, as I said. They're engineering projects, but that work with nature. In modern parlance, we call them nature-based solutions. Way ahead of its time, right? So, climate change, you have known, this often heard, that it's a threat multiplier. But I call Everglades restoration a resilience multiplier. 1, it's not only giving the water that South Florida needs. Every day for the last 25 years, restoration has ensured that when you open your faucets, you get clean, high-quality drinking water for drinking, of course, but for bathing or other uses, but also to run businesses. So that is, it's the fundamentals of our economy. But as we are discovering the many dividends that restoration is giving us, it is also a novel climate action, because as the volumes of water are sent south, they seep into the Biscayne aquifer, and what they're really doing is increasing the freshwater pressure, which gives us a chance to slow down saltwater intrusion that's contaminating our drinking water supply and hence protecting the future resources for our generations to come. It's also giving us it's a model sustainability action too, because it's as we store water more in the Everglades, we are first of all decreasing the amount of water that we send wastefully out to tide just to keep ourselves flood-free. But also, it is helping in flood mitigation, because when we re-nourish our wetlands, whether inland or at the coast, they get rejuvenated enough, strong enough, so that they can help us mitigate flooding and avoid damages that we regularly face. And lastly, restoration gives us the clean water that's fundamental to our economy. It is the clean water that supports 84,000 businesses across the state and supports 3 million people's livelihoods. And together, it's an economic activity annually of $220 billion. So that's significant. And in closing, I'd basically like to say that the Everglades are not just a natural beauty, they are restoring South Florida's resilience. And Across centuries and civilizations, communities that endure are the ones that protect their drinking water supply. Restoration is doing just that. We are demonstrating the benefits and the fact that it's working. But we are far from done. It's far from complete. We have much to go to protect and restore the Everglades, which are the foundation of our water security, economic prosperity, and risk resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Meenakshi and JP. That was a really great frame for our conversation today. And I think you guys did a great job highlighting some really impactful images of some of the problems that we're seeing to our natural environment, and then also to our built environment and our ability to live here if we run out of drinking water in the future. And I know you've also previewed some solutions, and I want to talk a lot today about Florida-driven solutions. But before we get to that, I also want to frame some of the barriers in between the problems and the solutions that we're discussing today. What would you see, we'll start with you, JP, if you don't mind. What do you see as the biggest hurdle to implementing some of the known climate solutions and some of the unknown climate solutions that we're trying to move forward with in Florida here?
Well, I think in Florida, we've seen challenges among our elected officials with mere acknowledgement of the fact that climate is an issue that we need to be addressing as a state. I do think that that has been substantially changing in recent years, but there's still a long road to hoe there to overcome some of the reticence to address the climate problem that we've seen in the legislature and even at the local government level. I think drilling down further on that, it's not just acknowledging that climate is something that we as Floridians need to be addressing and that we need to be at the forefront of because of our proximity to the ocean, to a changing ocean with rising sea levels that are right in our backyard. It's that we need to be addressing both resilience, which is what gets talked about most, and mitigation against a changing climate. I think we can talk about, strengthening our shorelines and implementing blue-green infrastructure to, lessen the blow of a rising sea. But we also need to be talking, and I know lots of folks in this room are talking about mitigation as a key tool in addressing the climate problem. That means reducing the amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere. And I think our state has been really reticent to address climate from the mitigation perspective. And that is a major challenge, and it's one that I am hopeful will continue to change and that Florida will become more of a leader on mitigation, while also keeping a pace with the resilience investments that are needed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's an issue that I see a lot in my work as well, is that the communities, a lot of the environmental groups, we're all talking about resiliency, and it really puts us on a defensive posture. And a lot of the challenges we're facing are reactionary to keep us living in the places that we're living with good quality of life, protect the marine mammals. But how do we get ahead of it and be on the offensive? And I think part of the problems that we're seeing as well that you're getting at is that sometimes the folks making decisions or passing the laws that we're all bound by don't necessarily see the interconnectedness of the ecosystems with resilience and mitigation.
Well, and look, it's an economic issue at the end of the day, and one that I think is a winning argument in the legislature. Florida can lead through mitigation, and I think that it can, really create a lot of economic impact and value by being a mitigation leader. And I think that that's a narrative that is increasingly more compelling and one that we're seeing take up traction.
Oh, great. And that's a great segue to open this up to you, Meenakshi, because we know that Everglades restoration is not only a resiliency tool in the face of rising sea level and our issue that we're seeing with the loss of biodiversity, but also a mitigation issue. So to pose the question to you in the context of the Everglades or anything else, what do you think the biggest hurdles we're seeing in implementing climate solutions are?
I think I agree with JP, of course, so I'll go on to another facet of challenges, and those are challenges in the mitigation as well as the resilience and adaptation works, and those are like funding, how much funding, the lack of capacity to pay, or even delays in funding, as well as competing priorities and political will. All these play into challenges in all aspects of climate change impacts that we are facing. And I'll use the example, if I may, of the drought again that we are currently facing. So we have this extreme drought situation. Counties are under water restriction. There is a 35,000 acre fire burning in the Big Cypress National Preserve currently. And there is also a part of water mismanagement. You know, we think of water mismanagement, oh, that's a third world crisis or a developing world crisis. No, it's a crisis of present day Florida. If I may point out, just in the past week, 15 billion gallons of water were delivered from Lake Okeechobee to Everglades agricultural area and other areas, but only 11% of those waters was sent to the Everglades, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Monroe. So that's mismanagement of water as well. So all these are hurdles, and we have solutions. It's not that we don't have solutions. Everglades restoration, one of the projects is the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, which is as large as the size of Manhattan Island. When it will be completed in 2029, I wish it was completed already, and of course the hurdles are the reason why it's not. If it were completed, it would store billions of gallons of water when we have plenty water. We get 60 inches of rain every year. It would store that water, and in times of droughts right now, it would send the water to the places where they're needed, because Southern Biscayne Bay as well as Florida Bay, Western Florida Bay are high in salinity right now, and they could use that water and we would not have a repetition of the 2015 seagrass die-off. So, you know, our hurdles have real consequences.
Yeah, I'd like to add another hurdle in there as well. I didn't want to end on hurdles, so we're starting on hurdles.
Good.
So as we're talking about sending water south and rehydrating our coastal ecosystems for salinity problems, I do think of Everglades restoration, and one of the biggest hurdles that in my line of work we're seeing is unsustainable development. And so unsustainable development specifically as it meets the speed of our climate solutions and our restoration projects. So we know that a lot of these solutions take a lot of time, and they take a lot of money and a lot of planning from the state, local, and federal levels. And at the same time, as we're planning these really great climate solutions, we're seeing unsustainable development coming in and undermining a lot of that work. And we know we need development. We need houses for people to live in. We need communities for people to thrive in. So I'm really speaking about unsustainable development in the wrong places. And I'd like to frame it actually because it ties in so well to the work that both of you all are doing. There's an Everglades restoration project down south that I know you both have worked on called BBCR. And that's designed to flow water west from the Everglades across the urban environment and into Biscayne Bay, which has far too high of salinity levels. And so we've been years and years into this planning project. We know exactly what land we need. We haven't decided, but it hasn't actually been signed off by the Army Corps of Engineers. So while we're waiting for this piece of property that we know is gonna fix a lot of our climate resiliency projects in this area, where it's gonna rehydrate our oceans, our bay, a development project came in, 400-acre industrial site, and they managed to convince the county commission down there that this industrial site outside of the urban development area in open land that we know is needed for Everglades restoration was the right move. And that had, you know, really, we filed a lawsuit, and luckily we've stopped that development, but they keep coming, and that really could have had catastrophic impacts for the climate solutions that we're implementing. And that's just one example, right? I'm talking about one thing. We know that's happening everywhere. And so I think educating our decision makers on the interconnectedness with development, for example, and climate solutions, and even, you know, how do you explain that development is impacting the salinity in the bay? That, you know, that's a harder conversation. So I'd add that as to my hurdle.
Yeah. Well, to address that a little bit, I think it's interesting where we've come to in Florida and where we are now in 2026. I feel like we're at kind of a white-hot point of anti-development sentiment that we haven't seen in decades in Florida. And I know in my networks I'm feeling that. I am in an echo chamber of activated folks who care a lot about this stuff. But I can also attest that outside of that echo chamber, people are really taking this growth management, growth development, development issues very seriously and are getting really fed up with it. And I would just point to, we used to in Florida have a growth management act that made you stop and think about development projects and the impacts that they might have on everything from infrastructure to waterways. Governor Scott in 2010 led the charge to gut the Growth Management Act, and we've been without it. And I would say over the past 15 years or so, we have seen some of the most intense development in Florida, and it's really proof in the pudding that an act like the Growth Management Act works, and it's something that we in Florida need. And I know that folks in my network are really advocating hard for bringing back some of the functionality of the Growth Management Act in the legislative session, which ends this week. But also looking forward, it's something that we desperately need.
Yeah, and we're following some unfortunate bills that are passing through as well. And I think the problem is twofold with this development. It's one, that we're not following the existing great growth management laws that we have in place. Those are being ignored essentially, and at the same time, they're being further degraded from a policy perspective. So lots of fun hurdles. Well, to move on to solutions, let's focus more on what those solutions are. So I'll start with you, Meenakshi. How are community organizations driving solutions to the climate problems in Florida? What is your organization doing, and how is it working with others?
Okay, JP touched on that. So what we at the Everglades Foundation really, hone in on is that advancing restoration. That's our sole mission, to restore and protect the America's Everglades, right? So I think the most powerful way we can advance restoration is to present the economic case for restoration, right? Now, I said one of the hurdles was competing priorities. When you have decision makers who have to decide between tons of projects that they must choose from, it is incumbent upon us, the foundation feels, to articulate the benefits of our mission of restoring the Everglades and make it easier for them so that they don't have to be confused about what to choose, what project to fund among several hundreds that they have to choose from. So in fact, in the year 2025, that's last year, our foundation, which was our economics team, including me, and we partnered with Earth Economics to value the natural capital of the Everglades, and we estimated it is worth $1 trillion, which generates $31.5 billion in goods and services every year. I will tell you just about the main three benefits, and you will understand them, that the Everglades contributes an economic amount of $9.2 billion for the real estate value of properties that are waterfront properties in the South Florida region. It also contributes $8.5 billion to our tourism economy because people want to be close to clean waters and the habitats that the Everglades presents. And thirdly, whether it is wetlands inland or whether it's at the coastal, you always hear about mangroves doing the hard work of buffering storms. Yes, they do. They prevent flood damages, which actually avoids damages that we would otherwise face if they were not there. But it's also the inland fresh waters which absorb the flood waters and prevent damages. Together, inland freshwaters and coastal prevent 8.4 billion damages related to flooding from extreme rainfall or from storm surge. So these are really big numbers, and these are very conservative numbers, that we had to put down, and we had to be very cognizant of the, the overlap in counting, that you might double count and so on. So it is a number that we present to decision makers, and another study from before also presents that if you would invest $1 in Everglades restoration, you get $4 back in benefits. So it's a resounding case for, the economic case is a resounding one for nature. Our economies depend on nature, on the Everglades particularly here, and that's one of the strategies and the winning strategies we find. But I do want to take another time, a little bit of more time to also say that it's not the Everglades Foundation alone, or one community organization alone. We depend on partnerships. We have to be collective in our efforts. So we're in South Florida, we are very lucky to have partners like the Everglades Law Center, like the Miami Waterkeeper, Audubon, the Tropical Audubon, as well as EDF. We all work together. And we are not only working for Everglades restoration, but for other causes also, and we are bridging the gap to urban resilience. We know that these issues overlap. If it's water supply and quality problem, it's also flooding problems that affect all of us. So we work together in several resilience projects, being subject matter experts or advocates, to make sure that we have comprehensive benefits for resilience as well as restoration.
I think that brings us back to what I think is going to be our theme today, which is you don't have to do everything. You just have to do something.
Right.
And collaboration is so important. So JP, you started out by talking about a lot of water quality issue problems and some of the very unfortunate ramifications from that. Can you talk to us about some solutions that you all are working on for other folks in the state to address water quality problems? And I'm hoping you can talk about kind of a localized level, but also on the state level in the few minutes we have left here.
Sure. Well, Florida fundamentally has a surface water quality problem, and what it boils down to is there are too many nutrients ending up in our coastal waterways. The nutrients are nitrogen and phosphorus, and these are from human-borne sources. And these sources are agricultural, they are municipal, they can be septic, they can be sewer, they can be all kinds, a litany of sources are draining off of our lands and into our waterways that are impacting our water quality. And this litany of nutrient pollution is only going to get worse with a changing climate as we experience droughts, as we experience flooding events, et cetera. And so what's needed in Florida is comprehensive water quality reform. We've had various bites at the apple. We had the Clean Waterways Act a few years back that was an initial attempt to try to crack the surface water quality problem. I think it didn't go far enough, and I think many people working in this arena would agree that it hasn't done what it promised it would do. So we need that kind of reform to actually be written, implemented, and enforced. But I also think that there's a cultural shift that needs to take place in Florida. And what we're doing in Florida is too much finger pointing at each other. It's big sugar telling municipalities that septic tanks are the problem and the sole source of all of the nutrient pollution that's driving harmful algal blooms. It's local governments pointing the finger back to big ag and saying that it's their fault and that they've altered the hydrology of the Everglades and that's the fundamental source of the crisis. The reality is there's enough blame to go around for everyone, and we need that kind of comprehensive reform emanating from Tallahassee to actually address this problem if we want a snowball's chance in Hades of having clean water in Florida. And a reminder, 1,000 people are moving here every single day in order to enjoy that clean water. And they don't want to come if the water is spoiled. So I do think that there is growing political momentum to see this comprehensive water quality reform. And I'm really glad that I get to work on it and work on it with people who care about it.
That's great. And I know you and I were discussing on a more local level things that have been effective, like in the Tampa Bay, the Reasonable Assurance Plan, where you brought together all of private, public, local groups to come up with a solution and take away that finger pointing. So maybe that's something we can implement on a statewide level.
Well, and the thing of it is there are tools in the toolkit where you can, on a watershed by watershed level, actually work together to address what some of these sources of nutrient pollution are and nip them in the bud before they put the nitrogen or the phosphorus into the water. But a lot of that also, boils down to addressing non-point sources, and I think that's been a historical challenge in Florida. And I think novel techniques are coming online from some of the state universities that allow us to address non-point source pollution and address them through reasonable assurance plans, TMDLs, the basin management action plans, et cetera. And I think that there is the possibility that enforcement of some of the existing tools in the toolkit will be helpful, but it still won't go as far as the overall comprehensive water quality reform.
Right, you got to hit the low-hanging fruit of what we have and then
Yes.
keep building on that.
Yeah, it's iterative.
Great. So we're running out of time, and I want to leave some time for questions. But as kind of to wrap us up here, what do you think are the number one climate solutions we should be focusing on the next 5 to 10 years in Florida? And Meenakshi, let's start with you.
I think we have to complete Everglades restoration. We have to do that. And for that, it all, again, boils down to funding. So find funding and make sure every year the Congress, as well as the state government, funds it. And I'll move over to even resilience projects. We have the resilience projects. And for example, Broward County has listed that it's a $28 billion plan for resilience. And $9 billion of that is going to be publicly funded. And so 19 is left for private funding. We have to find the funding, whether through public funds or private-public mixes. So I would say that projects that give comprehensive benefits, they reduce our risk, they are environmentally beneficial, they give economic benefits, and they are equitable social benefits involved. Fund those projects and make sure that you make the economic case for their prioritization and get the political will moving. I would say prioritize that.
So projects that get buy-in across sectors.
Across sectors.
JP?
I would just dial that in a little bit more. I mean, I completely agree with everything Meenakshi said, and Everglades restoration is paramount. I think restoration of other similar large-scale watersheds in Florida is paramount. For example, the Indian River Lagoon. But what I would also stress, maybe dialed in a little bit more, is instead of investing in hardened gray infrastructure, which has been the case for so long, that we invest in blue-green infrastructure solutions. That means, things, from living seawalls to mangrove restoration projects to, habitat restoration projects statewide and on a very hyper-local basis. So big-scale ecosystem restoration like Everglades, like Indian River Lagoon, but small-scale ecosystem restoration like, tiny mangrove islands in the Jupiter Inlet or, Apalachicola Bay. I mean, it could be anywhere that needs this kind of micro attention that will also have a meaningful impact on Florida's climate resilience.
Great. Thank you, guys.
If I could add that, Everglades restoration is a great playbook for lessons learned as well as lessons to be learned in adaptive management and risk management. So that's a great way, it's a great suggestion that you have in promote those nature-based solutions based on our ecology that we have here.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
Great. Well, we are running short on time here, but are there any questions? I want to leave some time for questions from the audience. Okay.
We may have time for Q&A also.
Oh, one in the very back of the room there.
You mentioned about the community affairs by sustainable development. You mentioned the community affairs agency that we had that REITs got eliminated years ago. What can we do to fight unsustainable development? What can we do to bring an agency like that back?
JP, do you want to?
Well, I mean, a simple fix would be to re-implement the Growth Management Act. I mean, we had a law that worked for decades. That law came online in the 1980s, and it worked very well until it was stripped away so that we could have this unbridled growth that we've been seeing. So, I mean, I think it's a simple matter of bringing back the Growth Management Act and the Department of Community Affairs that was associated with it. But there are other things, too. I mean, and we're seeing them coming through the legislature. I mean, and everything from, I don't know if you've been monitoring this cruise port development in Tampa Bay. I mean, I think there's reactions to that kind of development too that really doesn't, bleed into the Department of Community Affairs sort of bailiwick. And I think that, focusing on those kind of project by project pushbacks can be useful and meaningful as well.
Yes. Well, thank you guys so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. Thrilled to have you today.
That was pretty brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Very brilliant.
Thanks so much. Thank you.